This is the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast. I'm Lisa Salisbury, and this is episode 128, highlight episodes of 2024. Welcome to Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well, the podcast for busy women who want to lose weight without constantly counting, tracking, or stressing over every bite. I'm Lisa Salisbury, a certified health, weight loss, and life coach, and most importantly, a recovered chronic dieter. Here, you'll learn to listen to your body and uncover the reasons you're reaching for food when you're not truly hungry, freeing you to focus on a healthier, more fulfilling approach to eating. Hey everyone, Happy New Year. Today, this is going to be published actually on January 1st, 2025, which is super exciting. I also had a super exciting episode planned for you this week, and I'm having incredible technical difficulties with my podcasting software. So I wasn't sure if I was actually going to tell you that. I didn't want to be like, oh, so then I came up with this other thing because that episode wasn't going well. But I really am excited for you to hear from Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. That will be coming out next week. Come hell or high water, I will get that episode fixed for you. But right now it is completely unlistenable. So hopefully I'm going to be able to get that edited properly for you. So instead, what I decided to put together for you today was the highlight reel of 2024 episodes. When I went and looked at what were the most popular episodes, they were a lot of my interviews, a lot of the ones that I had some really great guests this year. So I pulled the top 5 guests and I'm going to play some highlight reels from those episodes. The most popular episode last year was episode 103, Weaning Off Obesity Medications with Aliza Olive and Kelly Bader. They coach on helping folks that are on obesity medications come off of them. But it was just really a fascinating conversation because so much of what they coach on is the same thing I do, which is just the proper lifestyle to maintain. So we talked a lot about portion sizes and food noise. So let's hear a little bit from that episode. I always wonder too, if when you're on these medications and you start to see some of the portions that are actually you're fine with, basically, you're like, oh, I guess I don't need an entire, like a whole sandwich. I guess really what is fine for me is a half sandwich or 3/4 of a sandwich. And I actually feel fine as far as energy levels and concentration and those kinds of things, and not like all of the other things that are not associated with hunger. Because a lot of times I think, well, if I don't eat enough, I'm going to have low energy, or I'm going to have this afternoon slump, or I'm going to like other reasons besides I'm going to be hungry if I don't eat enough. And so I wonder if it helps people realize like, wow, I really don't need as much food as I thought I did. Do you find that to be true?
I think that sometimes people on the medications do struggle with getting enough, and we really have to work on that. So making sure that you're not just eating 800 to 1200 calories. So getting enough so that you have those energy levels, so that you're not losing your hair. So like all those side effects, disrupting your hormones that can come along with not eating enough, it's very important. So, but yes, you're also seeing that like, okay, this is maybe what a correct portion could look like. And now I have the time, because I don't have this enormous food noise, to look at the label and see what's the serving size even, what does that mean, and how much is that? Because a lot of time, like before I started looking at labels, I thought peanut butter was a great source of protein. I was like loading up on the peanut butter. And then when I started looking at the label, it's like, oh, wow, okay. No wonder I was gaining weight. So it gives you that opportunity to slow down, look at those food labels. And another, point that I want to make is this is your opportunity while you're on medication and you don't have as much food noise to address some of those like emotional eating things that come up that we deal with as coaches, stress eating. Why are we stress eating? Because that's a possibility that it still happens even with the medication. And so when you can identify it and start making those changes while you're on medication, it'll make coming off of the medication so much easier. You can go, okay, when I was on the medication and I was in this super stressful situation, what did I turn to? Because I wasn't hungry. So how did I deal with my stress in a different way then, and starting to pick up on some of those things is certainly, I think, an advantage and is another way that the medication can make you gain some momentum, if that makes sense. I think the food noise, it has so many levels to it. Like, I don't know that there's like a true exact definition of it, but I think it's a combination of emotional eating, stress, which is also stress, cravings, and hunger. Like, it's this combination, this triad of all the things. And so if we can, while we're on medication, we don't feel that. And so we can start to, okay, okay, I don't feel hungry now, but if I go off medication, some of the food noise is going to come back. But how
Sure.
can we prevent as much as possible with your fiber, with your protein, kind of like spacing out your meals? Another thing to go along is while you're on medication, we don't want you skipping meals because that's not something that's going to be done in the future, because otherwise it's going to cause that food noise to be even higher. What I've heard people explain that come off the medication, they still have the food noise, but they've
Mm.
learned to deal with it better while they were on medication, and they've improved their relationship with food. So I think that piece of it is really important. That's why coaching while you're still on medication is really, really valuable, and while you're transitioning off, because we've got to get past that. This was me in the past. I'm either on a diet or I'm F it.
Oh, yeah,
It's either one
totally.
of those two, right? And
Yep.
so
Yep.
it's like on or off, the food is good or bad. And you can discover while you're on the medication that, like, oh my gosh, I still can have some of these things and still lose weight. Oh my gosh, that means that I should be able to maintain my weight while still having, 20% some fun foods, and then making sure I'm getting enough. I like to use the word enough, and getting nourishment, because getting that enough, getting all that protein, that fiber, and those vitamins from fruits and vegetables and all those good things, that's going to reduce that food noise a little bit because your body is nourished the right way.
Oh, that was such a good episode. I really love talking with Eliza and Kelly. The next most popular episode was episode 91 from April, and it was called Midlife Fat Loss and Brain Health Principles with Barbie Bowles. She is such a fabulous coach. She is a brain health coach. If you know her on Instagram, she goes by the Cognition Dietitian. We laid out the 4 pillars of fat loss within this episode that we discussed specifically for midlife women and what's different about that time and what's not different. And we also talked about some brain health and how to really prevent some cognitive decline. So here are a couple of my favorite clips from that episode with Barbie.
One of the things that happens with a decline in estrogen is a redistribution of fat to the belly. So even if you don't gain any weight, the fat from your butt, hips, thighs, arms, face, can start to accumulate in the belly area, and any new fat is going to favor that area. And it does become, I want to be very clear about the fact that menopause and the menopause transition does not directly cause weight gain. It creates an environment where fat gain is more likely because it's easier to get into a calorie surplus, meaning it's easier to be consuming more calories than our body needs to thrive, and that will end up as excess fat. And this can happen because of that decline in muscle mass, which does begin at age 30, between 30 and 35. But by the time you're 50, unless you've been consuming enough protein and strength training, you will have lost a significant amount of muscle. That's going to change your metabolic rate, not favorably. We may also be struggling with energy. We may not have what we used to have, to work out. We're not sleeping very well. That can impact our insulin sensitivity, our appetite, and our desire to work out. A lot of women get very upset about this comment, but it typically bears out that we are less active. And that doesn't mean that we're not working out, because a lot of us are, maybe even more than ever, but our NEAT or non-exercise activity thermogenesis tends to decrease as we get older. We're not chasing around small children. We're not lifting them. We're not going out dancing Friday and Saturday nights. We're not walking on our errands. That's partly modern convenience too. I mean, I remember when I was 35, I was not ordering things on my smartphone and,
Yeah.
I had to move
Yeah.
to get
I go to
stuff
Target
done.
way less than I used
So
to. I know that's silly, but like
yeah,
I
no, it's
definitely took the
not
kids out
because that
more
can
when they were younger and just having to run them back, run them
absolutely
around, generally speaking.
right. And we tend not to think about this, but little moves like that unintentional movement can add up to thousands of calories a
Mhm.
week. So, and over time, it's very gradual, but it accumulates. And then suddenly we're 10, 15, 20 pounds outside of our comfort zone at 55. But the good news is we can, combat it with some strategy. Oh, you were asking about kind of the difference. The truth is, there's no real difference in terms of recommendations between your 20s and your 50s. It's just that in your 50s, it becomes that much more important.
Mm,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
So like we can like kind of get away with doing like 75% in our 20s. In our 50s, it's got to be like 95, 100% with the exercise, the non-exercise activity, thermogenesis, getting really high quality sleep, managing our stress in a non-food way, and eating in a way that is going to translate into keeping our cholesterol healthy, keeping our blood sugar healthy, keeping intra-abdominal fat at bay. So it's not that it's anything new. All that low-hanging fruit still applies very, very much. It's just that you got to do it and you have to be consistent about it. That's what's different. Does that make sense?
There are just core principles and they're actually well known across the board. And
Yeah.
every diet you've ever been on is feeding on those core principles, but also feeding on your insecurities
Mhm.
and trying to make you think it's easier than it is, but it is simple, right?
Yeah.
So tell us, what would you consider the low-hanging fruit for weight loss or fat loss?
So obviously there's the nutrition piece. Can't get around that piece. But you are far better off going slowly than trying to go too rapidly for lots of reasons. But the primary being it's not going to be sustainable and you're wasting time. You are just wasting a giant chunk of time. If you try to go down to like a 1200 calorie diet or something, you're not going to be able to sustain that and you will regain the weight. Secondly, rapid weight loss also causes muscle loss, and that's
Mm.
antithetical to a healthy body composition and healthy blood sugar metabolism and being strong and functional independence and all the things that we want later on in life. So, what I always tell people is give yourself a year at least, and if it's significant amount of weight, maybe 2 years. Stop trying to do the 6 weeks to your summer body because it's just never going to work. Forget about the timeline
Yeah.
and just approach it as if what you're really concerned about is your health and not just your physical appearance. I am all about women looking like whatever they want to look like and rocking bikinis. I'm all about it. I don't have anything against that whatsoever, but you'll get there a lot faster in the long run if what you're focused on is the health of your brain, healthy blood sugar, healthy lipids, and healthy blood pressure.
Okay, I just love Barbie so much. I still follow her obsessively on Instagram, and you should too. My third most popular episode, and I'm realizing now that I'm halfway through, most top three or top five lists go from the least popular to the most. But in any case, this is how I'm doing it. So we're just going to go with it. But it was a episode about home cooking, and it was with food blogger Mel Gunnell. It was episode 111, Home Cooking Made Easy with Mel Gunnell. I had her on the podcast because home cooking is such an essential skill. And in fact, it is a weight loss skill because there are several studies showing that the more we eat at home, the healthier that we can become, essentially. So I talked to Mel about how to get dinner on the table fast and easy, and you guys loved this episode. So let's hear a little bit from that episode with Mel. If we're like trying to cook from home, but it's sounding overwhelming, what are some of your favorite shortcuts that maybe you can kind of combine with things you buy at the store and things you homemade? Like, I don't know if she's still on the Food Network, but one of those original Food Networks girls was like semi-homemade. I don't
Oh,
remember,
I totally
Sandra.
remember Sandra Lee. Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
totally remember.
And like half
Yeah,
her
that's
stuff was
funny.
using like a can of soup, which I'm like, no,
Yeah, she
not
got
for
so much
me.
hate too, and I was like, really, like,
Yeah.
it was such a brilliant, it's such a brilliant way to view things. So I
Yeah.
really feel like if people are overwhelmed with cooking at home, this diverges just a little bit from your question, but I would say the very first thing to do is to just sit down and plan a menu. I think one of
Mm.
the biggest reasons it's overwhelming to a lot of people is, what on earth do I even cook? And most of us are cooking, even if it's for ourselves. We have schedules, right? We have a work schedule and we have busy lives. And so when 5 o'clock rolls around is not the time. I mean, all of us are going to jump to something quick and easy and fast food or whatever in those moments. So planning a menu, I think, is huge. It takes the guesswork out of what to eat. And I don't think it has to be like Monday I'm eating this, Tuesday I'm eating this, but I really encourage people to say, look at your week and just plan even 3 to 4 meals, get the groceries for them. And then on that day say, oh, this meal slides into this day really well, so that you don't get to Tuesday and you're like, I actually don't have time, or I'm not in the mood for, chicken Alfredo or whatever it is. So I think planning a menu is really important.
Sorry, let me
Oh yeah.
just interject here. That's exactly how I plan, by the way. And I love that.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
plan a grouping of meals. And then when it comes to the day, you pick, okay, so
Yep.
today this meal will fit best with my schedule. I love
Totally.
that way of planning.
Totally.
So,
It's
yeah.
like, I call it like the fluid menu planning, where I think sometimes too rigid of menu planning is actually a curse and can turn people off to wanting to cook from home, or even menu planning in the first place. But I do the
Mhm.
same. I have these meals as if I have the ingredients. The other thing is, I would say, don't over menu plan. Don't plan 7 meals in a week. Generally, not many of us are cooking maybe 7 homemade meals in a week, but you can include a leftover night, pulling out the leftovers, or, something easy.
Mhm.
But to your original question about how to help it not be overwhelming, I think starting really simply. So some of those, like, I think what we have to say is we don't have to make every single thing from scratch, right? So if we
Yeah,
decide
yeah.
that dinner needs to be like, let's say, barbecue pulled pork sandwiches, buy the buns. You know what I mean? We're not having to like make homemade buns or homemade barbecue sauce. I think some of it is, especially if you're starting out, is to start out into that slowly. And then if it becomes something that you want to do, or it becomes a hobby where you want to learn to bake the bread, bake the bread. But otherwise, there's so many things. I would say in any given meal, there's things that you're going to be able to do to, like, for lack of a better term, cut corners a little bit to make it a little bit more doable. So some of that is, one of my favorite hacks right now that's saving me is, Costco, and I've seen them at Walmart and Albertsons, sells those microwavable rice packets. And rice is not that hard to cook. But being able to pull out that microwavable rice packet and know that I'm just going to focus on the main component of dinner and we're just going to microwave the rice means we're still going to get a meal. Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be every component. The other thing I would say is, not every weeknight meal or even a weekend meal needs to have a million side dishes. So my favorite thing to do is what's in season. So we just chop up fresh fruit. I mean, very often, like, our side dish is like fresh fruit and vegetables, and then like a main dish. And so I think taking out this maybe expectation that every meal needs to have so many different components. A well-rounded meal doesn't have to include 5 different homemade recipes, if that makes sense. I think we can include
Yeah.
just fresh cut up vegetables with ranch if you want, some dipping something in there, and then taking a look at each recipe and saying, what of this can I buy and what of it can I make, and kind of go from there.
Oh, such great advice from Mel. And if you didn't know, that is Mel of Mel's Kitchen Cafe. And so that is her blog and also the name of her cookbook, which I also own. Love it. The next episode I wanted to highlight is episode 115, Intermittent Fasting and Women's Health, the Impact on Hormones, Digestion, and Circadian Rhythm, with Jillian Greaves. She caught my eye and I approached her to be on the episode because she's a functional dietitian, women's health specialist, and I knew that she was an expert on intermittent fasting and, spoiler alert, how damaging it is for women. So we really got into that, and I will let this clip do the talking on that because it was really fabulous. So the first thing that we really wanted to hit on today and really discuss is intermittent fasting. This is such a huge deal in the dieting world right now. And there's so many people that are like, oh, it's the best way. And if you're eating, you're aging, and all of these like mixed messages. And it's honestly, it's super confusing. It is just super confusing. And I know from my own research that a lot of the intermittent fasting studies have been done on men. And so then you get authors that are like, no, here's how to do it as a woman, like a girl. I'm not naming any names, but you know, where does that information come from though? Because the studies haven't been done.
Right.
So tell us why intermittent fasting can possibly have negative health repercussions on women, and what you know about that and what you advise for that.
Yeah, I love this topic, and you're spot on. The large majority of research we have on intermittent fasting has been done on men, and or animal models. And that's a problem because, these studies aren't accounting for female physiology and female hormones. And at the end of the day, women and men are very different.
Well, as Dr. Stacey Sims says, women are not small men.
Women are not small men. Exactly. And, ultimately at the end of the day, women's bodies respond very differently to stressors than men's do. And at the end of the day, also, intermittent fasting is a stressor. It's a hermetic stressor, meaning in the right context, a tool like intermittent fasting or time restricted eating could have some potential health benefits for the right population in the right context. In the wrong context, this is going to be, like throwing gasoline on the fire. And something I also want to point out is that there's a lot of different formats when it comes to how intermittent fasting has been studied in research. What I see, I'm curious if you see this as well, but what I see in practice with women is a lot of women just interpreting intermittent fasting as skipping breakfast or,
Yes.
delaying eating for, the first part of the day. Do you see that
Yeah.
also?
Yeah. And the different models, especially the most popular, well, I think it's the most popular is like the 16-8 eating window where it's 8 hours of eating and 16 hours of fasting. That came about because of a research assistant's schedule. That was the most convenient time for them to come in and be 8 hours on. So that's when the subjects got fed. Like there was it's
No
like the
rhyme or
10,000 steps a
reason.
day
Yeah.
was a marketing gimmick when a pedometer came out in Japan. Like you have to look at the source of where these numbers came from. It wasn't because it was a magical good for you number. It was based on convenience and paying an hourly employee.
Yep. Which is wild when you
It is
break that
wild.
down, right? And in terms of the kind of skipping breakfast piece in particular and, delaying that overnight fast, we definitely still need more research here across the board, but in women in particular, with the small studies we do have, we are seeing different results than we are seeing in, the men and the animal models. And it's thought that, different responses to fasting in men and women may be due to, and Stacey Sims is actually someone who talks about this research a lot. It may be due to something called kisspeptin, which is a neuropeptide that plays a really important role with the regulation of the menstrual cycle and, our fertility, our sex hormones. And it also plays a really important role with appetite regulation and insulin sensitivity. So in some small studies, kisspeptin secretion is altered or decreased when women are skipping breakfast or delaying breakfast. And this is having a negative ripple effect on, the communication between the brain and the ovaries and kind of having a snowball effect on hormones. It's also leading to dysregulation with appetite hormones as well as decreased insulin sensitivity. So ultimately,
Which, like, that's also wild because your intermittent fasting people tell you that it increases your insulin sensitivity.
right. And there are animal studies and there are, studies on men that do show that benefit. But again, these, studies are not meant to be, kind of translated to women where our physiology is very different.
Jillian, as you can tell, was a great guest and really started some conversation about the intermittent fasting debate. And it's a really good listen if you want to listen to that whole episode. Of course, I'll link all of these episodes in the show notes. The last episode that I wanted to highlight for you as one of my most popular episodes was back in May. It's episode 93, and it's called The DEXA Scan and VO2 Max with Ken Apperson. So Ken is the owner of the DEXA Fit that I went to get my own DEXA scan and VO2 Max. And we had such a great conversation when I was there that I was like, hey, let's record. Let's get this out there, because he was really fun to talk to. So that episode is all about data. It's the data you can get about your health and body, and it just goes so much deeper than, your bathroom scale. So I have a couple clips here, one about the DEXA and one about the VO2 Max test that I did. So let's listen to those. Let me tell a little bit about why I decided to do this. So as my listeners know, I do not mind getting on the scale. It is not a problem for me. I have entire episodes about why we can weigh ourselves without the drama, that when we get on the scale, it is simply our gravitational pull at that moment in time on our bodies. It is math, it is data. So it doesn't bother me to get on the scale and look at my number, but for a long time, I've just realized it just doesn't tell me enough data. I actually wanted more data than that. So it's not that I wanted the scale to tell me something different or that I think my scale number should change. I just wanted more data. So the DEXA scan is fascinating because we get that on the medical side, but not until typically, it depends on your insurance, but typically you'll see that ordered around the age of 65. Would you agree, Ken? That's when typically people see it medically.
Well, medically, the only time you're ever going to see a DEXA scan is for a bone density.
Right.
Look,
that's what they're measuring.
It's just looking at this much bone in the femoral neck of your hip or your lumbar spine. But it's that machine is used for what you have, the whole body comp. And I got to tell you, Lisa, it kills me that Western medicine and health insurance companies do not pay for a $110 DEXA scan that we do. It's different. Bone density is different. And you're right, 65, yes.
Because the only thing that the medical system, that your insurance is going to look at is your bone density. But this machine actually does all of those other things that Ken mentioned. And that's what I was interested in. He looked at and we can go over some of my numbers, but he looked at my bone density and he's like, not a problem. And I'm only 48. So I expected that. My mom is 78 and her bone density is still really great. So from a genetic standpoint, I expected my bone density to be good. I didn't really come for the bone density, which I find fascinating because that's what you see it for only on the medical side. And so it's a little early, but it's good to see a baseline. I was a 2. Tell me what that means. What does the 2 mean in the?
Let me relook at your report. That's outstanding. Yeah, you were a 2. So yeah, your skeleton weighs 5.8 pounds, which always blows my mind that our skeletons weigh so little. Carrying our whole beings on that. But your T-score was a 2, which is really, really good. And you kind of touched on something that's important. There is a hereditary component to this. But that speaks to 2 things. Your number's outstanding. You'd have to throw yourself in front of an oncoming train to break a major bone. Have you broken a bone? I forget if I asked you that.
No, I never have. And interestingly, my mom just took a pretty hard fall. She caught her toe on a curb and went down pretty hard and did not break anything.
For your mom, that's outstanding. So a T-score of 2 is absolutely outstanding because you're 2 standard deviations denser bone than who you're being compared to, which is a healthy 30-year-old woman. Because we stop growing bone at 30. The factory just shuts down completely. And we're battling gravity for the rest of our lives to keep our bones dense. Your mom has weathered the menopausal storm. Menopause wreaks absolute chaos, catastrophe on bone density. I've seen that. You're at a 2 standard deviation above. I've seen women go from in your neighborhood, not as good at your next level, but close to your number and be diagnosed with osteoporosis. After
menopause,
the menopausal storm.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to be driving that number as high as we can, even when the numbers are good. And we do that with weight bearing exercise. Strength training is the best. Walking and running, great. the flip side, like ellipticals and, the cycling and swimming, it's great for the heart, but there's no weight bearing illness. So you're not going to ever increase your bone density, but your number, yeah, that speaks to some good genes for sure. If your mom, you said she's 78.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I digress. The German study suggested that if we get our bone density to 2.5, we would not break a hip upon a normal fall. Now, when you reach 70 or older, I don't want to be too dramatic, but the odds aren't good to survive a full blown hip break over the age of 70. The numbers are staggering, but this study suggested if you're at 2.5, you wouldn't break a bone at that. So I can only speak to myself. I'm hell-bent on getting my number to 2.5 right now because I've had relatives that have broken a hip and declined, and one of whom died. So that was a really powerful peer-reviewed.
I adjusted the zones on my heart rate app to match the ones that came out of the VO2 max test. But I want to talk a little bit. I know that you're well-versed in Peter Attia's work. Tell us why he advocates so strongly for average people. You and we're not athletes. We're not, Yep. You sound a little more competitive than I am. I'm just average. Why is it important to know our VO2 max, and what is it really telling us about our longevity? Because your answer, I'm just going to, spoiler alert, this is why I had this test done.
Well, in a podcast of many great questions you've asked, that's the best one you've asked. And it's probably the most important. The VO2, it's the measurement of the maximum oxygen delivery and utilization for cardiovascular exercise. A better way to put it is how efficient is your heart getting blood to your muscles? But the reason it's so important, it's like if you want to compare it to automobiles, you've got high performance vehicles, and then you've got cars with smaller engines. Now, if they take off from a starting line, one car is going to completely outpace the other. The other is going to try, but it can't keep up. And then eventually it's going to blow a gasket. I'm sorry to put it in such crass terms, but it really is a great analogy. And I'm not smart enough to come up with that analogy. That's Peter Attia. But it really is that simple. It's like our bodies, there is a genetic component for sure. So none of us can be like Eliud Kipchoge, the world record holder in the marathon, or Lance Armstrong, people that have crazy high VO2s. But what we can do and what we can affect, and that's the important thing, we can affect this number that we get, is we can increase that to our potential as a human being, right? And it's limited by our genetics, but it doesn't matter. We can get to a place where longevity gets significantly higher.
Because VO2 max is right up there with like not smoking. And I mean, as far as like your risk factor for longevity, all-cause mortality, VO2 max is like an amazing measure. Yeah.
It's the number one metric cardiologists use to gauge longevity. Hard stop. There's no close second. It's been that way for 7 years. It's interesting that in 70 years, think about all the technology that's happened. But one thing that hasn't changed is a VO2 max test. It's still the gold standard for assessing how healthy your heart is.
All right. And that is a wrap. Those are my top 5 episodes for 2024. I, of course, will put all the links to the original episodes in the show notes if you want to listen to the full episode. Let me know what you thought of these episodes and, of course, what you'd like to see coming up on the podcast. Last year, I did a content survey for topics, and I'm going to put that together again. It'll come out next week. So be thinking about what you'd like to hear from me, and I will have a content survey in the show notes next week, and I will be doing a giveaway for everybody that enters that. So be thinking of what topics you'd like me to cover. I am so glad you tuned in today. If today's insights and highlights resonated with you and you're ready to make lasting changes in your health journey, I'd love to help. Don't forget to grab my new freebie, What to Do When You Overeat, in the show notes. You can also book a free coaching session with me to dive into personalized strategies for sustainable weight loss and a balanced relationship with food. You can schedule it at the link again in the show notes. Remember, it's not just about the food, it's about empowering yourself with choices that truly serve you. Have a great week. And as always, thanks for listening to the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast.